Not all madness requires magnets. So today, as I got the first of the two racks and got a bunch of jerseys out, and I've got the room kind of sort of partly done. I came up with this last night. So last night I was thinking, why not just take a look at playoffs? And here's the thing. So how important is home ice advantage? And are we really starting to look at parity in the NHL? We talk a lot about it, but I was like, well, are we actually seeing more parity now than we were before? The answer seems to be yes. So again, I went with 1981 through 2019. This is madness without magnets, like I said. So what you're looking at here is the first row is round one, the second row is round two. Then you have the conference finals, and then you have the Stanley Cup final. And I just went with whoever had home ice advantage as being whether or not they won the series. And yeah, the interesting thing is having home ice advantage for the conference finals since they went to the divisional matchup seems to be a large detractor. They're 3-9 since we went to the division series, according to my calculations, which I have no way of knowing they're 100% correct, of course, because madness. But when it was 1 versus 16, which was my first year watching the playoffs, 8-7 was the record of teams with home ice advantage, which is surprising because, again, it's 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15, 3 versus 14. You would think that with that large discrepancy between them, that you'd have some sort of agreement that your favorites are going to win, and yet the favorites only went 5-3 in the first round. And of course, today, there was talk as well about how are they going to come back with the playoffs? Well, 24 teams doesn't work because it'd mean Montreal might play against Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh's 15 points ahead of Montreal. And how's that fair that Pittsburgh could miss the playoffs if they lose the play-in? Yeah, and it's a realistic fear that you could lose on a play-in because there is definitely some history of things being kind of close. Now, 1982, we go to the divisional matchups: 4-4 in the first round, 2-2 in the second round, 1-1 in the conference finals for the home teams to start the series, and the Stanley Cup champion is the home team, same as in 1981, same as in 1983. We don't see that change until 84. So things stay pretty much the same. But if you look, 8-7 was the record of the team with home ice advantage in 1982, 1983, 12-3. 10-5 in 84 and 11-4 in 1985. So home ice, really important throughout that period, makes sense since it felt like there wasn't a whole lot of parity going on at that time. But then you get back to 8-7 in 1986, where home teams were 4-4 in the first round. They're 4-4 in 87, and so they end up going 11-4 because home teams win out from there. 1988, home teams enjoy the first round. They're 7-1, and then in the second round they're 1-3, and then all three teams with home ice advantage win both the conference finals and the Stanley Cup final. 11-4, 11-4, 10-5. So 10 is the lowest you get outside of 8-7 here in 1986, from 1983 all the way through to 1990. Not a lot of surprises overall. Just saying overall, you still get your runs in there, but not a ton of them. 1991, 8-7 is the record. 9-6 for 1992. And interestingly enough, the only time in the divisional matchups that we see more upsets than you see favorites winning. Favorites meaning the team with home ice advantage. Not always do we see a team with home ice advantage actually be the favorite at the start of a series. Sometimes we're like, yeah, we know who's got home ice, but it's Washington, so they're going to blow it. And so 7-8 went the teams with home ice advantage to start the series in 1993. So we start in 1994 with the 1-8 records, but during this period, home teams in the first round 62-34, in the second round 28-20, in the conference finals 17-7, and in the Stanley Cup finals 9-3 for the home ice advantage teams in the Stanley Cup finals. So if you're looking for percentages, overall it's 116-64, which is a 64.4% advantage for being the home ice team at the start of a series. 64.6% in the first round, 58.3% in the second round. So those are your divisionals. And then when you get to the conference finals, 70.8% in the conference finals and 75% in the finals. So you're Stanley Cup finalist, you have home ice, you have an excellent chance of winning. So we get into 1994 and the divisionals, which go all the way up to 2004. 1 versus 8. This is where, or 1 versus 8. Divisionals is from 82 to 93. From 94 to 2004, we're into the 1 versus 8s. And I wanted to separate 1 versus 8 from before the cap to after the cap, because we can all agree that the salary caps kind of even things out. So I want to have that separator in there. So 1 versus 8 the first year, you go 5-3 if you have home ice in the first round, 3-1 with home ice in the second round, 1-1 in the third round. Though technically Vancouver had a 2-3-2 format that heavily favored them, even though they didn't have home ice. So, right? So 10-5 was the overall record if you had home ice to start the series. 1995, 8-7. So you have an 8-7 in here. Things are really tightening up as the 80s go along. 1996, they start to look a little different again. 11-4. So 7-1 in the first round, 3-1 in the second round. The interesting thing, of course, going back to 93 for a second, all the third place teams made the conference finals that year. 1997, 6-2. Somebody's going to say it, so I'm going to throw that in there. 6-2 for the home teams in round 1 in 1997. They split the second round and the conference finals, and then the road team wins the Stanley Cup in 97. So 9-6 is your final record. 10-5 in 1998. 9-6 in 1999. 2000, 11-4. So we're starting to see a little bit less in the way of a team scoring an upset that's on the road to start the playoffs. 9-6, 13-2 in 2002, which is absolutely far and away the biggest number on the board. 13-2. So I'm looking to see. I don't think there's a 12-3 on the board. There isn't. So 11-4 is as close as you get. 9-6 in 2003 and 11-4 in 2004 as we get set for the salary cap era. So pre-salary cap era. From 94 through 2004, the home team's 58-30 in the first round, 32-12 in the second round, 11-11 in the conference finals. So true parity in that conference finals, and 9-2 in the finals. So there you go. 65.9% in the first round, 72.7% in the second round. So that's where it's interesting. The first round is consistent with here, but the second round, it's far greater of an advantage in 1 versus 8 than in divisional matchups. In the conference finals, home ice doesn't matter anymore, 50% to the 70 here. 81.8% winning percentage if you have home ice to start the finals, compared to 75% before that. So again, home ice means a lot in the Stanley Cup Finals until that changes. And it starts to change in 2006, although it doesn't change right out of the gate. The Stanley Cup Finals, home ice matters right up until here, and then it starts to kind of go away. 2006, the first year of the salary cap era, 4-4, 2-2, 1-1, 1-0. 8-7 is your overall number. So you get your lowest number since 95 in 2006. Understandable that you might see some really unpredictable playoffs playing a brand new format with new rules and all this other stuff. 2007, 10-5 is your overalls with 6-2, 3-1, and then 0-2 in the conference finals and 1-0 in the Stanley Cup final. 2008, 4-4, 2-2. You end up with a 9-6 overall because the last 3 series are won by your home teams. 9-6 as well in 2009. 8-7 in 2010. So you have an 8-7 here and an 8-7 here. Things seem to be tightening up because you don't have a single 8-7 along here. 4-4, 2-2, 1-1, and then 1-0. Same as in 2006 for the 8-7 overall. 2011, the Stanley Cup Finals ends up going to the road team, of course, with Boston going and beating Vancouver, but your overall record's still 9-6. 2012, the LA Kings winning on the road 4 times turns the whole thing on its ear. They're the number 8 seed, and they turn the whole thing on its ear. The whole playoffs end up coming out 6-9, and 4 of those are because of the LA Kings. So if you don't include the LA Kings series, the home team goes 6-5. You can't not include the LA Kings. 95, for instance, where it's 8-7, the New Jersey Devils were a road team that won a lot in those playoffs as well. So when you look at it, it looks pretty lopsided in favor of the road team winning. But again, 4 of those are LA. 2013, 9-6 for the home team. Another interesting one is when you look at the 2010. I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth. The Eastern Conference, I think it was 1-3 for the home team and 3-1 for the home team in the West. Just one of those curiosities. 9-6 in 2013. Hey, if it's a madness board, I really should be jumping around. I apologize. There's no yarn, and that I didn't do this on the cork board. I apologize. So 3-5 in the first round in 2013 for the home team. 4-0 for the home team in the conference final, and then a 1-1 and a 1-0. Total of 9-6. So how did things go in that period before we get to the divisional matchups? Well, home ice matters, but not as much. 36-28 for 56.2% in the first round. Way below where it was when we had 1 versus 8 pre-salary cap. Way below where it was in the divisional matchups pre-salary cap. We have 64.6, 65.9. That comes down to 56.2. Interestingly enough, it's 56.2% all the way down until you get to the Stanley Cup Finals where it's 62.5%. All of these numbers, minus this 50% here, for the conference finals all the way through, all those numbers are much lower. Home ice means a lot less since the salary cap came in. So the numbers, to me, they work. Now, we come into the divisional matchups, and suddenly home ice means even less in the divisional matchups that first year, 2014. 4-4 in the first round, 1-3 in the second round, 0-2 in the conference finals, 1-0 in the Stanley Cup final to go 6-9. 8-7 in 2015, 9-6 in 2016, 9-6 in 2017, 10-5 in 2018, where most of the home ice teams won, and then 2019 we see a sub 500 record for the third time in the decade. So when you look through the 80s, do you see a sub 500 record? No. The 90s, you see one. So you get one season where a team that has home ice doesn't win half the series. They lose more than half. You go through the 2000s, you don't have any. 2012, 2014, and then 2019. 3 times. You see more road teams win than home teams. The overall numbers since the division playoffs came in, 60.4% for the team with home ice advantage in the first round, which is higher than when it was 1 versus 8. And 14-10 in the second round, which again is higher than it was when it was 1 versus 8. Home ice has actually meant more since the divisional matchups came in. 25% in the conference finals, so they don't mean anything in the conference finals, and 50% in the Stanley Cup finals, which is really, really low, comparatively speaking, with 75% here, 81% here, and 62.5% here. It is a smaller sample size, yes, since 2014 to 2019, but it definitely looks like we're trending towards some unpredictability. So what caused me to decide to do this video today? What gave me this idea last night? We're watching Lucifer, and I'm writing numbers down in the book and doodling away. It's because we don't know what's going to happen with 2020. We don't know where the playoffs are going to end up. And people are going to talk about asterisks, and they're going to talk about how, oh, this team's not going to be legit. And if we see an underdog win it, people are automatically going to say, well, if it was real playoffs, they wouldn't have had a chance. The reality is there's very little to choose between the top teams and the other teams in the playoffs anymore. And over a 7-game series, we're really seeing that anything can happen. 2018, 7 out of 8 teams with home ice in the first round won. But that's an outlier. The outlier now is that 7-1, where we see here 7-1, 6-2, 6-2, 6-2, 6-2, 6-2 here as well. We go to the 1 versus 8. You have 7-1, 6-2, 6-2, 6-2, 6-2, 6-2, and then the salary cap comes in, and it really tightens up the rosters. We have a 6-2 here, and then not again until the 7-1, which was 9 years later. So reality is, if we get the 2020 playoffs, we're going to see teams with home ice advantage in the first round. Of course, there won't be fans. So that's going to be the arguing point right there. Like, well, it's not really home ice. Yeah, home ice didn't mean anything last year. And home ice didn't mean a whole lot in other playoffs as well. Like I said, this kind of feels like an outlier because the Kings were a number 8 seed that went on a run. But at the same time, the Kings were a number 8 seed that went on a run. And so I thought this was interesting. I thought it'd be fun to look at and prove that, yes, overall, the overall numbers since 1981, 185 and 111 are teams in the first round for 62.5% overall. Second round, 92 and 56, 62.1%. Conference finals, 40 and 34 for 54.1% advantage for being a home ice team. And then in the Stanley Cup, 26 and 11 for a 70.3% rate overall. When you compare that to the 75%, the 81.8%, that number's coming down. Having home ice in the Stanley Cup Finals doesn't mean as much as it used to. So we'll see if we get playoffs this year. And if we don't, then we can speculate wildly about who might have won the Stanley Cup, who could have won the Stanley Cup, and we'll have videos on that for the next decade or longer. Because I can still talk about 2005, and you can still get a half a dozen different answers about who would have won that Stanley Cup if that season had been played. It's not a fun game, is it? All right. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Again, if my math's off at all, I apologize. I went through this. I double, triple checked. I changed a couple numbers around. But it either way, to me, it shows that, yeah, home ice doesn't mean what it used to. And we have real parity in the NHL right now. Because every now and then people will say, well, not really. Because you look at who's been winning the Stanley Cup. It's getting tighter and tighter. And you look, you got the Blues win it here. The Capitals win it here. They had never won the Cup before. So, yes, you have 2 back-to-back here by Pittsburgh. That may very well prove to be the exception rather than the rule. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And, hey, thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. And like I said, I got one rack in here today. It's actually behind the computer. And so I've started the process of changing things out a bit. That dresser's empty now. So, bonus. And then when the other rack shows up tomorrow, empty everything else out, and we'll rearrange things. But let me know your thoughts on this. Madness without magnets. It can be done. Thanks for all your support. It means a ton, and I'll talk to you again soon.